Over the last few years, there's been a revolution in primary school teaching. That's partly because every primary school in the country has been equipped with at least one computer system. Here at Wilson Primary School in Reading, there's some marvellously exciting work going on. And yet, in government circles, we detect an unfortunate air of complacency. So, to find out what really is going on, we've enlisted the help of Anita Straker, who was director of the National Primary Project for the now sadly defunct MEP. We started by asking Anita how computers could help in primary schools.
Well, certainly not by using expensive equipment for repetitive practice of things like sums and spellings. I mean, those things can be easily achieved in the primary classroom in other far cheaper ways. What I really believe is that computers should be used to do the things that are difficult to do in a primary classroom, that they should be used to give children opportunities to explore, to experiment, to investigate, to solve problems that the children find relevant and interesting.
The mouse. Then now it's going to go up, then it was going to go up. It's going to go the tractor. You bumped into the elephant and you started.
I think the good examples really are of two kinds. And in the first kind of software that I think is being used really well in the primary school, there's an embedded problem actually in the program or in the piece of software. So we're talking about things like simulations and adventure games. And the problem might be based on fact, decoding a passage of text. It might be based on fantasy, finding a dragon that's lost in a pagoda in China. It might be a combination of the two. And the children involved in exploring the kind of decisions that they may take at various stages of the programme, finding out what an appropriate sequence of their actions would bring about a resolution to the problem.
Then there are the so-called software tools, like word processors.
No, it's not the end.
Used to help creative writing.
My mum said, I better phone the police. Then they called the police because they could have killed us, couldn't they have? Well, kidnapped us, yeah, on the boat. But we luckily escaped. Yeah, luckily. Yeah. My mum said, you did it wrong, you forgot to do the capital. How do you do the capital? Do it. But you still did it wrong. Me too.
What exactly is meant by open-ended software tools?
Well, we're talking about here things like databases, word processors, a programming language like Logo, maybe even a spreadsheet. Now, there are no questions, no problems in those sorts of programs. They are simply tools that the children can use to help them find answers to their own questions.
Computers were only introduced here after their role had been carefully considered. Quite rightly, the staff wanted to be convinced that all the effort was going to be worthwhile. They were, and the results speak for themselves. But is this experience typical?
In the good schools, the work is superb. I think we could say that Britain, in the use of microtechnology in primary schools, probably leads the world. It's tremendous. But sadly, that's not happening in all schools, and there are many schools still which are simply using drill and practice software to help with sums and spellings. And there are schools too that are putting their computers away in cupboards where they're gathering dust. I went to one school fairly recently that was fortunate enough to have 5 micros. Not one of them was in use.
Despite the good work being done here, there are some, perhaps many schools with problems. What are the causes?
I think that there are a variety of different reasons. The first reason, I think, is that there is still a quite widely held belief that sums and spellings are what computers are in primary schools for. For example, Kenneth Baker on Any Questions in June actually said, isn't it a good thing that our primary schools have computers to help with spellings and sums? The second reason, I think, is probably a question of hardware. If you've only got one computer and there are 200 children in the school, you can only get 5 minutes of keyboard time per child. And of course you can't get going with logo throughout the school in that kind of circumstance. If you don't have a printer, using a word processor doesn't make any sense. If you don't have a disk drive, there's no point in using a database to help the children with their research. And most primary schools haven't yet got printers and disk drives. The in-service training problem is probably the biggest problem of all. When computers first went into primary schools, of course, there was a requirement that 2 teachers from each school undertook 2 days of in-service training. And in those 2 days, they learnt how to plug the machines together, how to load a program, how to save a program, and how to run the small programs, the drill and practice software that was provided. And that's all that could be achieved. Yet those 2 days in-service training were actually a quite mammoth drain on local authority resources, and yet they've only scratched the surface. They haven't got down to the real educational issues, and they haven't extended to all primary teachers. This is something that affects everybody that teaches in a primary school, not just the 2 teachers that went on the course.
Despite the successes, everybody here knows that there's always more that could be achieved. So, in this new and rapidly expanding field, what should be done to help the teachers?
Well, let's start with the objectives. I mean, what we need are better public statements about appropriate objectives for the use of computers in primary schools. We need statements from HMI describing good practice as they viewed it. Statements perhaps from Kenneth Baker about what he really feels is important. And then secondly, as far as the hardware is concerned, I mean, it would be nice to think that the Department of Trade and Industry could come up with some kind of subsidised offer to improve the situation in primary schools with respect to, say, disk drives and printers. I think it would be helpful if perhaps the educational support grants could be used to put into local authorities advisory teachers to support classroom-based work in schools in the same way as they're used for mathematics and science, but they don't exist at the moment for microcomputer work in primary schools.
We have taken the first steps to integrate computers into primary education. Undoubtedly, we lead the world at the moment, but other countries are catching up fast, and if we stand still, they'll soon overtake us.
And we're seeing a slow change in the world from keeping words and numbers stored on paper to storing them electronically. And by the time our 5-year-olds are young adults, probably an electronic means of storing these things will be used far more than paper. Computers will play a far bigger part in their lives than books will. And I think we should be spending every ounce of effort that we possibly can to help them to make maximum use of this very powerful resource.
And we'll be looking at more educational issues in the near future. Next week, we visit Texas Instruments and see a new chip in the making, and we have an exclusive interview with Sir Clive Sinclair.
Until then, goodbye.